The wind howled through the evergreens like a chorus of distant wolves. Snowflakes fell relentlessly, layering over a wilderness already buried under a meter of frozen silence. Deep in the forests of British Columbia, the only sound breaking the stillness that morning was the slow, deliberate crunch of boots in the snow. Ranger Eli Moore paused mid-step. There, streaks of red. A thin, winding trail of blood snaked across the white blanket, sharp and jarring in the purity of the winter landscape. Eli crouched, gloved fingers brushing the stained snow. It was fresh, warm enough to melt the upper layer, but thin enough to suggest whatever left it was losing strength fast. He rose, instinct sharpening. This wasn't the aftermath of a predator's meal. This was a cry for help. With 20 years patrolling the backcountry, Eli had seen his share of pain. But something about this trail felt different. He followed it, weaving between frost-covered branches, each step a battle through thigh-deep drifts. The forest grew denser, the trees older. And then, at the base of a moss-draped pine, he saw her. Curled into herself like a broken question mark lay a small bobcat. She couldn't have been more than 6 months old. Her fur was matted with blood, snow clinging to her sides. Her hind legs twisted at an unnatural angle. One ear flicked weakly as Eli approached, but she made no move to flee. She couldn't. Cautiously, he knelt beside her. "It's okay, little one," he whispered, reaching for the thermal blanket tucked in his pack. Her golden eyes opened, locking with his. There was no fear in them, only confusion, pain, and something that pierced deeper: resignation. Back at the Wildlife Recovery Center, Dr. Amelia Rhodes was already prepping the emergency room by the time Eli carried the bobcat in. The moment she saw the animal, she froze. "Spinal trauma," she muttered after a quick visual. "Likely from a trap, maybe poachers." The center wasn't built for major surgeries, but this wasn't a case for waiting. Within minutes, the small operating room was humming. Machines beeped, gloves snapped on. Amelia worked with focused urgency, her hands steady as she cleaned, examined, assessed. 4 hours. The bobcat survived. Amelia leaned against the wall, shoulders trembling from exhaustion, eyes locked on the still form breathing shallowly on the recovery table. "I'll call her Willow," she said softly. Delicate, but strong. No one replied. The room was too quiet. In the days that followed, Willow lay motionless in her padded enclosure. They'd built it just for her, temperature-controlled, quiet, dimly lit, designed for recovery. But she refused food, refused water, refused comfort. She didn't snarl or growl like other wild animals did when cornered. She simply shut down. Her eyes often stared into space, unblinking. And at night, the staff heard her cries, low, guttural, not of rage, but despair. They were sounds that haunted the walls and disturbed even the most seasoned caregivers. Amelia reviewed the diagnostics again and again. The surgery had gone as well as it could, but the spinal damage was permanent. Willow would never walk normally again, never run through the underbrush, never hunt. A bobcat with no ability to survive in the wild. What kind of life would that be? The conversations turned dark. "Maybe we're just prolonging suffering," one of the interns whispered. Amelia heard them, and she didn't have an answer. On the third sleepless night, a car pulled into the center's snowy driveway. Wildlife photographer Rachel Dean stepped out, her breath rising in visible puffs. At her side, tethered loosely to a lead, padded a large gray husky. His coat shimmered under the floodlights, and his eyes, icy, steady, ancient, seemed to take in everything with quiet understanding. "This is Bruno," Rachel said as she entered the center. "He's been with me for 13 years. thought the animals might like him. It was said half-jokingly. But Amelia, too tired to argue, gestured toward the recovery wing. Bruno was calm, silent, as he followed Rachel to Willow's enclosure. He didn't bark or sniff around like other dogs might. Instead, he stopped short of the steel bars and sat down, facing the small figure inside. Willow didn't move. And then, she blinked, her head lifted just slightly. For the first time since she had arrived, she noticed something. Amelia, watching from the monitors, leaned forward. "Hold on." Willow didn't growl, didn't retreat. Instead, with slow effort, she dragged herself a few inches closer to the bars. Her eyes locked with Bruno's. His tail gave a single, respectful wag. Then something extraordinary happened. Willow laid her head down. Her body, tense for days, began to loosen. Within minutes, her eyes fluttered shut, and she slept. Not restless dozing, not half alert. True, deep sleep. Amelia stared at the screen, disbelief washing over her exhaustion. "Play that again," she whispered. The loop ran once more. Bruno arrives. Willow stirs, moves closer, sleeps. The monitors showed her heart rate had steadied. Her blood pressure, finally, was normal. The stress indicators had dropped like a stone. In a quiet room filled with snowlight and machines, Amelia let herself hope, for the first time since this all began. "We may have just found her reason to live," she said. For the first time in days, the sanctuary exhaled. Amelia stood by the infrared monitors in stunned silence, her eyes locked on the live feed of Willow, curled against the far side of the enclosure, eyes closed, breathing steady, body still. She was sleeping, truly sleeping, and all it had taken was the quiet presence of a 13-year-old husky with a graying coat and sky-blue eyes. Bruno. The next morning, Amelia met Rachel just outside the staff kitchen, both holding mugs of steaming coffee. Neither had slept much, but for different reasons. "I don't know what happened," Rachel said. "Bruno just knew where to go." Amelia nodded. "I've never seen anything like it. She hasn't eaten, hasn't slept properly since she got here, until last night." They returned to Willow's enclosure together. Bruno padded along the corridor without hesitation, stopping just short of the bars. When Willow heard his claws on the concrete, she stirred. Her ears twitched. Then, slowly, she dragged herself forward with her front legs and lay beside the bars again. This time, Bruno lay down too, nose nearly touching hers through the narrow gaps. Amelia quietly placed a dish of raw meat near Willow. To everyone's disbelief, the young Bobcat began to eat. It was Rachel who suggested a controlled trial. "Let's see if this really is something replicable." For the next week, Bruno was brought to sit beside Willow for an hour every morning and every evening. No barking, no touching, just presence. And every day, Willow improved. Her vitals normalized, her appetite returned. Her eyes brightened, slowly shedding the dull glaze of trauma. She even began grooming herself again, something no one had seen her attempt since surgery. But it wasn't just biological, it was behavioral. Amelia noticed Willow watching Bruno with laser focus. When he sat, Willow attempted to shift into a similar pose, dragging her back legs carefully behind her. When Rachel gave a short whistle and Bruno tilted his head, Willow mimicked the same motion, her ears twitching, head turning ever so slightly. "She's copying him," Rachel whispered one afternoon, stunned. "Not copying," Amelia said. "Bonding." On the 5th night of the experiment, it snowed heavily. Rachel, exhausted from a full-day shoot in the backcountry, decided to head back early with Bruno. It was the first night in a week that Willow would be alone. At 10:13 p.m., the night staff heard the first cries. At first, it was a low moan, like a distant wolf. Then it grew into a series of high-pitched, almost pleading wails. Unlike the growls of pain she'd once made, this sound was something new. Loneliness. By 10:45, Willow was in visible distress. She had clawed her bedding into disarray and began dragging herself frantically across the enclosure, scraping against the walls. When the night techs tried sedatives, she resisted violently, growling, biting the edge of her enclosure, and refusing food or water. Amelia was called at home. At the same moment, Rachel's phone buzzed. Bruno was already pacing at the cabin door. He wouldn't settle. His ears perked, tail stiff, whining softly as if trying to speak. "He knows," Rachel whispered. By 11:30, the decision was made. Amelia authorized an unprecedented action. Bruno would be brought back to the sanctuary that night, not just for a visit, but to sleep overnight, next to Willow. A large kennel was quickly set up beside the enclosure, and cameras with night vision were positioned to monitor both animals closely. The air was tense as the staff watched from the control room. At 12:08 a.m., Bruno was gently led in and lay down next to the bars. Willow immediately stopped crying. She turned, dragging herself toward him with urgency. Within seconds, she pressed her body against the bars, her nose aligned with Bruno's. He, in turn, pushed himself closer, letting out a single deep exhale. 5 minutes later, Willow was asleep. Not dozing, not twitching or flinching. Fully, peacefully asleep. The data didn't lie. Overnight, Willow's cortisol levels, a key marker of stress, dropped by nearly 70%. Her heart rate stabilized. Her breathing became rhythmic. For the first time since her rescue, she entered REM sleep, a sleep phase critical for mental and physical recovery. Amelia couldn't believe it. They tried everything, playing recordings of Bruno's breath, using his fur in a blanket, even placing another husky nearby. Nothing worked. It wasn't just any dog. It was Bruno. As the days passed, the bond deepened. Bruno would lay by the bars while Willow practiced crawling further each day. She began to mimic more than just posture. She responded to Rachel's cues, lifted her paw when Bruno did, and even tried to sit like he did, balancing on her forelimbs. What began as mere survival was slowly becoming learning. Willow wasn't just healing physically, she was building identity. Still, not everyone at the center was convinced. Director Henry Alden called for a formal review. "If this becomes precedent," he said in a tense meeting, "we risk anthropomorphizing wild animals and undermining their reintegration into the wild." "This one's never going back," Amelia replied. "She can't, but maybe, just maybe, she can still have a life worth living." Henry frowned. "That's not up to us to define." So, a test was proposed. 12 hours. Willow and Bruno would be separated entirely. No contact, no scent, no sound. The results were devastating. By the 8th hour, Willow had shredded her bedding, refused food, and was covered in self-inflicted scratches from clawing at the steel walls. Bruno, too, was distraught, pacing, howling, refusing to rest. By hour 12, Amelia stepped in. "Enough," she said firmly. "We're not doing this again." Willow was returned to her enclosure. Bruno placed beside her. They touched noses and slept. Morning light spilled across the sanctuary in soft gold streaks, melting frost from the windows and casting long shadows against the concrete floors. Inside Willow's enclosure, something had changed. She was no longer just lying there. She was moving, not walking. Her hind legs remained weak and unresponsive, but pulling herself forward with powerful, deliberate strokes of her front legs. Muscles in her shoulders rippled with effort as she inched toward the edge of the enclosure, where Bruno lay watching. Rachel stood silently nearby, camera in hand, not to film, but simply to witness. "She's adapting," Amelia said in awe. "Not like a bobcat, like something new." They had expected grief, dependence, perhaps even slow degeneration. What they hadn't expected was mimicry, learning through observation, not instinct. When Bruno sat, Willow sat. When Bruno tilted his head at a whistle, so did Willow, albeit clumsily. She began responding to gentle voice cues, not as a trained pet might, but as a companion who had learned the rhythm of another life. "She's not being domesticated," Rachel said. "She's synchronizing." Each day, Willow ventured further. A small ramp had been added to her enclosure, leading to a low rock structure in the safe outdoor section. At first, she simply rested near its base. Then one morning, with Bruno watching from behind the wire, she placed her paws on the stone and began dragging herself up inch by inch. The staff held their breath. She reached the top. It wasn't high, barely half a meter, but it was her Everest. From that vantage point, Willow lifted her chin into the wind, eyes closed, letting the winter breeze ruffle the fur on her face. She looked alive. Dr. Amelia kept detailed logs of everything: Willow's sleep cycles, food intake, muscle development, emotional response to Bruno's proximity. They conducted trials with toys scented like Bruno, and playback recordings of his breath, even his whines. Nothing worked. It wasn't his scent. It wasn't his voice. It was him. But even as Willow's world expanded, Bruno's began to shrink. His age was catching up with him. The strong-legged dog who once pulled sleds across Yukon trails now moved more slowly. He groaned slightly when lying down. His coat began thinning. Cold nights made him stiff. Willow noticed. One afternoon, when Bruno struggled to rise from his usual spot beside her enclosure, Willow didn't pace or cry as she once had. Instead, she watched him patiently, then slowly dragged herself closer and laid her head against the bars, so that her fur pressed against his. The bond had shifted. She was no longer the fragile one. She was watching, waiting, becoming the steady presence. "She's taking care of him now," Rachel said softly one evening, standing beside Amelia. "I never thought I'd see that." By late spring, Willow had developed a unique style of movement. She couldn't leap or run, but she could maneuver with surprising efficiency. Using her forelimbs and powerful abdominal muscles, she would half crawl, half slide across flat ground, pulling her hind legs like a quiet passenger. The outdoor enclosure was expanded to give her more space. Small tree stumps, low rocks, clusters of mossy logs. Each was a challenge and an opportunity. And each day, Bruno was there. But then came a visitor, Henry Alden. He stood outside the enclosure, arms crossed, eyes tight with skepticism. "So what's the plan here?" he asked Amelia bluntly. "Keep her in a cage with a dog for the rest of her life?" Amelia didn't flinch. No cage, no leash, no tricks, just two souls helping each other heal. "She's a wild animal," Henry insisted. "What happens when the dog dies?" That question lingered longer than anyone wanted to admit. A week later, Rachel began building a new habitat, on the edge of her property, near the forest line. It wasn't a cage. It wasn't even a pen. It was a semi-wild territory, fully enclosed for safety, but filled with trees, grass, rocks, and hollow logs. It had enough space for Bruno and Willow to be together, and enough seclusion to give Willow dignity. Amelia oversaw the veterinary permits. Henry signed off reluctantly. And on a misty June morning, Willow was placed into her new home. Bruno ran, with effort, to greet her. Willow waited by the gate, then began crawling beside him, pressing her body into his once more. They explored it together, a dog and a bobcat. Odd, improbable, and perfect. The first frost of the season came earlier than expected. Yellow leaves drifted from the trees around Rachel's cabin, settling in soft piles across the enclosure's boundary fence. A chill crept through the forest as the air turned crisp and thin. Inside the semi-wild space, Willow had already chosen her favorite place for the colder months, a flat rock on the eastern edge where the morning sun reached first. Every day, as dawn broke across the treetops, she crawled there, dragging her powerful front legs over the leaf-strewn path, and waited. Bruno always followed, his steps slower than before, but unwavering. They would lie there together, shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes Willow rested her head against Bruno's chest. Sometimes he laid his chin gently atop her spotted back. No words, no sound, just the quiet strength of companionship. But age was leaving deeper prints on Bruno. His once thick fur had thinned across his back. The once playful trot was now a careful shuffle. Cold weather stiffened his joints. Even his breath had changed, slower, deeper, sometimes with a rasp that hadn't been there last winter. Willow noticed. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she began adjusting, slowing her movements, staying closer, watching him constantly from her shaded spot under the fallen oak. When Bruno stopped mid-walk to catch his breath, she paused too. When he lay down on the grass halfway through their routine, Willow curled beside him and didn't move until he did. For the first time since their bond began, Bruno wasn't leading. Willow was. Rachel kept a quiet vigil through the window each day. She rarely brought out the camera anymore. Some moments were too sacred to capture. "This is the final season," Amelia said during a visit in October. "He's lived long, and well." Rachel nodded. "He's not afraid, and neither is she." Then, one unusually warm autumn afternoon, something extraordinary happened. Bruno had wandered toward the center of the enclosure, sunlight pouring down on his back. He lay there too long, tongue out, panting hard. Willow, who had been napping near the shaded edge, stirred. She watched him, waited, and when he didn't rise, she crawled to him, slow, steady, determined. She nudged his side with her nose, once, twice. Then, using her head and shoulder, she gently began pushing him, not in panic, not with force, but with purpose, toward the shade, toward safety. It took several minutes, and Bruno resisted slightly, confused by the movement. But Willow didn't stop. She guided him, step by step, until he lay beneath the oak tree's cover, breathing easier. Then she laid down beside him and closed her eyes. Bruno licked her cheek once, as if to say thank you. By early December, Bruno no longer rose for morning walks. He stayed near the heated corner of the den Rachel had built for him, eyes clouding with sleep more often than not. He still perked up when Willow approached, tail thudding gently against the bedding, but the strength in his legs was gone. Willow never left him. She brought pieces of her food closer. She pressed against him at night, keeping him warm. Her eyes, once haunted by her own pain, now held the quiet focus of a caretaker. She had become what Bruno had once been for her. The snow came thick and fast in the second week of December. On the longest night of the year, the sky was velvet black, the moon hidden behind layers of cloud. A hush blanketed the forest. Bruno lay curled on his bed inside the cabin. His breaths were shallow now. Each inhale was a gentle struggle. That night, for the first time since coming to Rachel's, Willow did something unthinkable. She pushed open the back door herself. Normally terrified of enclosed spaces, of human walls and ceilings, she crept into the house slowly, her claws clicking softly against the wooden floor. She found Bruno in the corner of the room, curled beside him, placed her head on his shoulder, and watched. All night long, she didn't blink, didn't sleep, didn't move, just stayed with him. And when dawn finally broke over the snow-covered world, Bruno exhaled one final time, and didn't inhale again. Rachel found them there, Willow still pressed against him, eyes open, body still. She didn't cry, she didn't move for hours. But by that evening, she had returned to the rock on the eastern edge of the property, watching the last light of the sun dip below the hills, alone, but steady. For days, Willow kept to herself. She didn't eat much, didn't explore. She lay in the den Bruno once occupied, curling in the exact space where his body had rested. Rachel checked on her often, but didn't interfere. Grief, in animals, is quiet and sacred. Then, on the third morning after Bruno's passing, something shifted. Rachel stepped outside with her coffee and froze. There, on the eastern rock, was Willow, her head held high, amber eyes glowing in the golden light. Her body still bore the marks of her injury, her hind legs dragging slightly behind her. But her posture was clear. She was not broken. She was beginning again. That spring, a young fox cub was found near the road, its front leg mangled by a poacher's trap. Rachel brought it home, wrapped gently in a blanket, laid on a small bed just outside the enclosure. Willow approached slowly. She sniffed the trembling bundle. Then, without hesitation, she curled around it, forming a quiet arc of warmth and protection. That night, for the first time in months, Willow slept soundly, and beside her, a new life healed. Spring unfolded slowly across the northern forest. Ice melted into streams that laced between mossy stones, birds returned to the trees with songs of new beginnings, and wildflowers pushed through the softened earth with quiet resilience. And every morning, as the sun crested the ridge, Willow returned to the rock, the same rock she once shared with Bruno. She still dragged herself up the slope with strong forelimbs, pausing only to glance at the spot beside her. It remained empty. But it was no longer hollow. It was sacred. The fox cub, named Kip, had survived. His leg had been amputated after infection set in, but he healed quickly, perhaps because Willow never left his side. At first, he had trembled beneath her thick fur, unsure whether this strange spotted creature was a threat or a comfort. But by the third night, he had curled into her body without hesitation. Willow let him. No growls, no warning, just warmth, just presence, just what Bruno had once given her. The sanctuary staff watched in awe. "This isn't just instinct," Amelia whispered one afternoon. "She's passing something on." Rachel nodded. "A legacy." Kip grew stronger with each week. His movement remained clumsy. 3 legs carried him unevenly. But he learned quickly. He watched Willow closely, followed her when she crawled, mimicked her pacing and pauses. When she stopped to rest, so did he. When she tilted her head at the wind, he did too. One morning, Kip reached the rock first. He stood tall atop it, waiting for Willow. When she arrived moments later and pressed herself against the side, Kip laid his tail across her back like a sash of comfort. It wasn't dominance, it was honor. That summer, more injured animals were brought to the sanctuary: an owl with a damaged wing, a fawn orphaned by wildfire, and a young lynx found tangled in a fence. Willow didn't bond with all of them, but she watched them. She waited for them, and when they were ready, some would come to lie beside her, on the rock or in the den, or just near enough to feel her presence. She had become more than a survivor. She was a center of gravity. Rachel began writing again, chronicling Willow's transformation in journals, blog posts, and quiet late-night entries meant only for herself. One line stood out, written in black ink across a weathered page. "She doesn't need to be wild again to be whole." She's rewritten what healing means. Tourists never came to see Willow. No cameras, no documentaries, no staged photos. But letters came. From children who had read about her story in school newsletters. From veterans who saw their own journey in her struggle. From people who had lost loved ones and found something familiar in the stillness of a bobcat staring into the sunrise. Years passed. Kip grew into a lean, clever adult fox. He remained close to Willow, even after gaining confidence in his own space. The two of them shared the enclosure like siblings born of different worlds, one born in violence, the other in grief. Together, they formed something new. A living reminder that strength isn't about speed. It's about staying. About returning to the rock, day after day, no matter how slow the climb. By her 8th year, Willow had slowed again. Not from pain, but from age. Her once sleek coat carried specks of gray around her face. Her vision wasn't as sharp. Her climbs were more deliberate. But every morning, she still made it to the rock. And every morning, Kip was already there. Waiting. One day, as snow returned for the first time that season, Rachel noticed something carved into the bark of a tree near the enclosure. A visitor had left it anonymously, scrawled with the tip of a stick. Bruno plus Willow equals hope. She smiled, not because it was poetic or accurate, but because it was enough. That winter, the sanctuary officially renamed the Eastern Rock, Bruno's Watch. A small wooden sign was placed near it, simple and respectful. He watched over her until she could watch over others. Willow pressed her cheek to it the first time she saw it, then climbed onto the rock just as she always had, with Kip beside her. Under falling snow, two creatures, one with spotted fur, one with fiery orange, sat in silent vigil. No audience, no music, no script, just two beings who had been broken once, now whole because of love that crossed species, pain, and time. Because healing isn't found in perfection. It's found in someone who stays,